Hello, today we are going to solve May 2024 paper question number 6 part C. Calculate the overhead recovery rate per hour to be charged by Abeer for each of the machining and assembly department rounding to the nearest penny. Now let's calculate the total overhead recovery rate that needs to be charged to the customer or for their budgeting purpose. So the budgeted rate is going to be the total cost. So for the machining, machine hours have been spent great, and for assembly it is, we can see that it is labor hours are more, so I'll take labor hour rate. Okay, so let's calculate that. So the first one is going to be equal to, okay, this is equal to the total cost was 131,837 divided by the total machine hours spent was 4250, so that will be equal to, so it is going to be equal to 31.02 pounds per hour that I needs to charge. Okay, so if I charge at this rate, I'll be able to recover my costs. This is what it means. Okay, then assembly, for the assembly department, the cost is the overhead, the total overhead cost 98,163. The total overhead cost. Okay, this is the total overhead cost. So recovery is the rate. Okay, so this is the total overhead cost which we had calculated from the continuous allotment. Okay, so this is going to be equal to the total overhead cost for the assembly 98,163 divided by the labor hours are more here. Okay, so I'll put 5,900, so that is equal to 16.64 pounds. Okay, so this is the rate at which I will have to calculate. This is the budgeted rate, okay, at which I will have to calculate whether I have been able to perform well or not well in the future. Now after that, we are seeing that for part D, during the year ended 30th April 2024, the actual expenditure on overheads was 184,000 and the actual hours worked were this much. Okay, so these were the actual hours worked. So can you say whether there has been an under absorption or over absorption of the overhead cost for the business of Abeer for the year ended 30th April 2024? Now we have the budgeted rate, okay, which have been set by the business earlier. Okay, and now the actual it has to be compared with the actual performance to understand whether the cost has been over absorbed or under absorbed. Now let's calculate that. So what should have been the machining cost using the budgeted rate? Okay, because now I have the hours, actual hours worked was 4,400. Okay, now the rate I had to charge is 31.02. That is equal to 136,488 pounds. Okay, I'll get this much using this much hour. Okay, hours if I have worked, and the rate was this much, so the cost should have been, machining cost should have been this much. The machining cost should have been this much. For the assembly, if I actually work for 5,500 hours and the rate I had budgeted was 16.64, okay, that means my actual cost should have been 91,520 pounds. Okay, this should have been my cost for the assembly department. Now let's add these two, okay, so that to understand what is the total cost. Okay, Okay, total cost, budgeted cost. This should have been my total budgeted cost using the budgeted rate, right? Using the actual hours worked. So that will be 136488 plus that one plus 91,520. That value is going to be 228008. Okay, this is my budgeted, but actual overhead cost was 184,000. Okay, actual overhead cost is equal to, has become 184. Okay, 184,000. The actual is less. Okay, which means that I have been able to over absorb, okay, the difference. So the total budgeted cost, okay, the actual overhead cost has become less than the budgeted cost, so it means over absorbed. Okay, and if my actual overhead cost 184, it has become less than my budgeted cost. Okay, then the budgeted cost, this is not allocated, this is budgeted cost, overhead cost, then I have been able to over absorb the thing, right? I have been able to over absorb the thing. Otherwise my actual cost had become greater than my budgeted overhead cost. Okay, then I will call it as I have been able to under absorb. I have not calculated, the performance has been poor, like that. Okay, you can conclude like that. So let's write here. So now my actual overhead cost is very less than my budgeted cost, which means that I have performed well. I have over absorbed my costs, overhead over absorption of. Okay, so you can write it as over absorbed overheads cost. So by how much? Find the difference between those two. So that by the amount 44008. So by this much amount I have been able to perform well. Okay, that is what it is meaning. My overhead, actual overhead cost has been less for the business. So that means I have been able to over absorb those overhead costs very well. So evaluate the use of overhead recovery rates by Abeer. So the points in favor is, the whenever I use overhead recovery rate, it means my accurate cost comparison happens. I will be able to control costs in my business, and it helps in management decision. So whether to change my remuneration method so that labor productive hours can become much better, or I should be able to take a decision whether to purchase a machine which is able to perform better. And also the points against overhead recovery rates are, these are estimates and it can still be inaccurate. Still the costs are going to go high because I have to prepare these budgets, right? These overhead recovery rates I have to prepare using budgets and some historic costs. So in conclusion, overhead recovery rate are of value to the business of Abeer. So you should